All right, so welcome everybody to the March 2022 version of the Friends of the Savannah Coastal Wildlife Refuge second Tuesday Zoom presentation. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. This is I believe, our sixth session so far, and the other five are on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and just type in Friends of the Savannah Coastal Wildlife Refuges, you'll find it, and you can view any of those previous sessions that we've recorded. Each is about 1 hour long. This one I hope will be about in that same range. I would like to make a couple of announcements. First of all, number one, welcome to everybody, all our friends and members and supporters out there. I'm glad you could join us tonight. I hope you've all saved your calendar or marked the date on April 30th. That's the day we're going to have our first in-person general membership meeting since the pandemic started. Actually, our last meeting was in 2019. And this is going to be our first in-person one. And we think this is going to be a very important one. This is what we're looking forward to as sort of a reboot of the Friends group coming out of this long hiatus from the pandemic. We are looking to recruit some new leadership, new board members. Some of our old board members are stepping down, and we're looking to have a session where everybody who attends can chime in with their ideas about the direction for the Friends group, what they'd like us to be doing, give people an opportunity to participate. We're going to announce some other programs there, like our latest photo contest, for example, that Matthew Emmer, one of our board members, has been working on. And that'll culminate in actually a show in a gallery in Savannah during Refuge Week in October. So that's going to be an exciting announcement for all of you photographers out there. So that'll be coming up shortly, and it will be kicked off at that April 30th meeting. That meeting will be in the pavilion, the Beach Hill Pavilion at Savannah National Wildlife Refuge on Saturday, April the 30th, starting at noon. We'll be serving lunch, and then we'll be having, I think, hopefully a very spirited discussion on the future of the Friends group. Where do we go from here? Also, good news is that we are going to restart probably the end of this month or beginning of April, our Pinckney Island National Wildlife Refuge mobility assisted tours. These are docent guided tours of Pinckney Island National Wildlife Refuge, specifically aimed at people who have trouble maybe walking through the refuge, since there's no drive-through there, but it's open to anybody by reservation only. We have a limited number of tours we can do because of our agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But the sign up will be available on our website as soon as we get for sure when the dates are and when we're going to open up. So keep an eye out for that. If you haven't done this tour, it's been very popular. We're very glad we're able to get it restarted again. It will be outdoors. Mask will be required, but again, it's, I think, a pretty low risk environment. We're limiting the number of people, and you're outside on a tram riding around. So I think it's going to be a pretty low risk environment for folks. So hopefully we'll be able to get that kicked off again. It has been, again, a very popular program for us. I would ask that people keep their mute on during the presentation, unless you want to ask a question, and you'll feel free to either ask a question and unmute yourself and ask the question if you like, or if you want, you can enter it in the chat box, and I'll try to keep track of the chat box and try to answer any questions that show up in there. We are actively recruiting people now to be new members of our board. We have 2 active candidates right now that we're talking to, but we would certainly like to have a few more so that we can broaden the experience on the board and get hopefully some younger folks. Most of the board members, well, a couple exceptions, are getting kind of long in the tooth, as they say. And we are looking for some fresh leadership, some fresh ideas. I think this is a perfect time for us to kind of restart what we're calling Friends Forward, again, coming out of this doldrums that we've had for the past couple of years. I don't have any news about when the visitor center is going to open. I hope that's going to open fairly soon. And we're going to be recruiting volunteers to work at the desk and staff the gator hole there. We're pretty much going to need to go through a whole retraining program, I believe, since nobody's been there on the desk for 2 years now. But I hope that's going to happen pretty quickly. In terms of the wildlife drive, it looks like they're making good progress on the repair and renovation on the wildlife drive, but it's probably going to be another year before it opens. At least I haven't heard anything to suggest that it's going to be sooner than that. But hopefully by this time next spring, it's going to be open, and we certainly plan to have a big reopening celebration at that point. But we're all keeping our fingers crossed that they don't run into any kind of issues between now and then, and that they don't have any storms this year that might set back their progress or do some more damage in the meantime. So that's all the announcements I had for now. What I'd like to do is to go ahead and get started with our session. And this month, I'm going to be the guest speaker. This is a talk that I had given years ago to the Fish and Wildlife Service on. Basically, at that point, was talking about first aid. If they're out in the refuge and they have an incident with one of the critters out there, what they should do. And I've expanded a little bit to talk about some of the critters that are out there, what you can do to keep yourself safe. I don't want to scare anybody off. I think the refuges are a very safe place if you abide by certain real common sense guidelines. And we're going to talk a little bit more some of the specific critters, as well as some of the what you can do if you get into some trouble or have an incident out there on the refuge. So I'm going to start the screen sharing right now. And Chris, I'm going to ask you just to help me out and tell me what you see. Whoop. All right, what is up there? The introductory slide?
Yep, that's your first slide.
Outstanding. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay. All right. I call this Gators and Bugs and Snakes. Oh my, it kind of reminded me of, and I tried to actually get a clip of that of lions and tigers and bears, oh my, but decided that was a little too cutesy for this presentation. So what we're going to talk about basically is what's out there that could cause you some problems, and then how to avoid that. Just a disclaimer, I will be mentioning some brand name products, but I got no financial association with any of these vendors or products, except I do serve as the volunteer manager of the Gator Hole, with the emphasis on volunteer there. So I have no financial interest in any of the products presented here. Again, our refuges are safe places to observe our native wildlife. There's never been a reported human-animal encounter on our refuges that resulted in the death of a person. I ran this by Russ Webb, who's refuge manager again earlier today, just to make sure. And while he said there'd been occasional non-fatal venomous snake bites, there's never been a death on any of the refuges that he's aware, and he's been around here for a very long time. And I think the important thing to notice is if you use common sense, follow some of the guidelines we're going to talk about, then you're going to help us keep that safety record intact. And I think that the most important things to remember that wildlife is out there. That's one of the reasons, of course, people go out to the refuges, but you should try to observe wildlife from a distance, for their safety and for yours. Try not to disturb them if possible. Certainly don't disturb the ones that may cause you some trouble. The animals out there aren't looking for close encounters with us, and they may strike out defensively if they feel threatened or cornered. So that's why it's important to observe from a distance. Don't ever force an animal into a position where it's in fear of its safety, and it may strike out in the thinking that you are after it or going to try to do it some harm. Never feed any animals on the refuge. It's against federal regulations. But even more important, I think, is that once you start feeding animals, they start losing fear of people and begin to associate people with food. And the old saying on the refuge is a fed gator is a dead gator. Once people start feeding the gators, that individual gator will associate the food with people. They will associate the presence of people with the presence of food, and may well start approaching people. And once that happens, that gator has to be taken out because then they do pose a potential danger to visitors. So for their sake and for yours, please don't feed any of the animals out there, and particularly don't feed the gators. And remember, we're visitors on the refuge. This is where the animals live, and we should be a considerate visitor in their home, just like we would expect, hopefully, anybody else in our home to come as a visitors. Obviously, people like to take pictures, but take them from a safe distance, and be careful that you don't get so focused on those binoculars or the camera that you end up stepping on something or stepping somewhere where you shouldn't, or falling or tripping or going in the water. So keep some situational awareness even when you're looking through your camera viewfinder or through the binoculars. Don't attempt to pet or pick up any animal. If an animal appears sick or injured or dead, you don't know the status of that animal. Certainly never pick up any bats that you find. Bats are the most common carrier of rabies in this part of the country, and even a bat that's sick or maybe newly dead is a potential source of infection for rabies. And venomous snakes have been a number of cases where people thought they were dead, went to pick up the rattlesnake to cut off the rattles, and the snake had just enough life left in it to bite them. So if you see an injured or sick animal, try to contact somebody on the refuge staff to help take care of it, but please don't take that on yourself. If you're in the refuge and driving in your car, then you're pretty much safe. You don't need to lock the doors. I've never seen an alligator who could open a car door. But if you decide to get out, you want to make sure that you're wearing appropriate footwear. Flip-flops, Crocs, anything open-toed is probably not appropriate, especially if you're going to be walking on any of the dikes or the trails, which are not always mowed, very short. Sunblock, especially in the summertime, of course. Insect spray or protective clothing. Again, depending on the time of year and how much rain we've had, there can be lots and lots of mosquitoes out there. We know there are lots of ticks out there. So you want to come prepared with an appropriate insect spray, and we'll talk about that later, or protective clothing. And just to put in a plug for the Gator Hole, which is our nature and bookstore at Savannah National Wildlife Refuge Visitor Center, we do sell a line of clothing called bug bafflers, which is a very effective, very fine mesh. I own some myself, and they work very well to prevent insects from contacting your body. And again, situational awareness. Just be aware of your surroundings. Don't get so taken in by the beauty and the serenity of the refuges that you don't pay attention where you're putting your hands or your feet, where you're stepping. So what's out there that could bite or sting you or injure you in some way, and how can you avoid that? And if you do get nailed by something, then what should you do? What's the basic first aid that you should do if you do get into an encounter with one of our native critters? Well, there's three major categories out there. One are the big critters like gators, bobcats, feral pigs, coyotes. The others are insects and relatives, and I just realized I spelled that wrong. I'll have to go back and fix that. And we'll talk about spiders, fire ants, and sort of the other stinging insects. Of course, mosquitoes by themselves don't cause any problems, but they do carry a multitude of illnesses. And if you had to rank all of the animals we're going to talk about tonight as who's caused the most suffering to humans over the years, it has to be mosquitoes, and not any of these other ones that you might think about as sort of the dangers of being outside. And then we'll talk about the snakes later on. A little bit of a warning: I do have some really nice close-up views of snakes. If you're a little squeamish about looking at snakes, so when we get to that part, you might want to back off a little bit from your computer. But I do want to give you a little warning ahead of time. Let's talk about the big critters first. And of course, one of our signature critters is the American alligator. People come from all over the country to see alligators here. One of the ways I got involved with volunteering at the refuge is when I moved down here from Michigan and we had family and friends come down to visit. Everybody wanted to see gators. And that's how I started visiting the Savannah National Wildlife Refuge and going through the wildlife drive. And people were just thrilled to see these big critters out in the wild. They're such a throwback to prehistoric times. I think people are just amazed to see these things swimming around freely. They go back in the fossil record about 220 million years ago. Alligators themselves branched off about 150 million years. Some were much bigger. This is just a drawing or a impression of what Deinosuchus might have been. There are fossils of this alligator, or this crocodilian rather, over 40 feet long that have been discovered in the fossil records. Some of these actually in Texas. This is named after Deinosuchus riograndensis, which tells you where they found the bones. So that's a big crocodilian there. Wouldn't want to tackle with that. And that was probably able to take down some fairly good sized dinosaurs in its day. Fortunately, we don't have anything that big to deal with now. The American alligator is one of two alligator species that are still in existence. One is the Chinese alligator, which is a much smaller, and as you might take from the name, is a resident of the temperate regions of China. The big difference between alligators and crocodiles are pretty exclusively tropical animals, whereas alligators live much further north of the tropics and can can survive in much lower temperatures than most of the crocodilian species. American alligator is the largest of the North American reptiles. There has been one report of one in excess of 19 feet, but that was from the late 1880s, and it was never really confirmed. It was from a skin, which can be easily stretched. So the maximum, realistically, the maximum size for males is around less than 14 feet. Anything that big is pretty unusual. There is some sexual dimorphism, and females tend to be smaller. I think since alligator hunting has been reinstituted, there has been a 15.5-footer that's been trapped and killed in Mississippi, I believe, or possibly Louisiana. Generally, you're not going to see them that big. It takes a long time to get that big. They were hunted almost to extinction back in the 60s. So we may, over the coming years, see some more bigger ones than that. But I think 14 feet is probably the max you're going to be able to see any place. And being cold-blooded, they are most active when the air temperature is between 82 and 92 degrees Fahrenheit, and they regulate their body temperature by getting out in the sun, or if they get too warm, get back in the cooler water. During the wintertime, they brumate. This is a sort of an equivalent to hibernation, but they don't really go into the same hibernation state that mammals do. And they do, if it warms up, they will come out. You can see in January, if it's a nice warm day, the alligators may be out there sunning themselves to get warmed up a little bit. The largest known living species of crocodilian is the saltwater or estuarine crocodile that lives in the Indo-Asian area in Australia. I think the longest documented one is about 22 feet 2 inches and weighed over a ton, I believe. So fortunately, we don't have big crocodiles here to deal with. Crocodiles tend to be much more aggressive and pose much bigger threat to humans than alligators do. The males are territorial, and this is a time of year when they're going to be starting to look for mates. And if you're out on the refuges, you may hear this very low guttural rumbling, and that is the males staking out their territory. Females are smaller. They do tend to have some territories around where they build their nests, and they will be building their nests early in the summer. They dig up dig down into the soil and into the debris, and they lay a clutch of 30 to 60 eggs or so, and then they cover it up with rotting vegetation, which keeps them warm. And that helps to incubate the eggs. Mom doesn't go very far, though. She will hang around that nest. So if you see an alligator nest, know that mom is somewhere around. And if you approach it and she feels like you may be threatening that nest, she's going to let you know about it, and maybe to your detriment. So don't approach these alligator nests if you can avoid it, if you can identify them and see them. Also, the mothers, after the babies hatch toward the end of the summer, it's usually a couple of months, like 60, 65 days that they'll hatch. Frequently the babies will stay together and the mom will look after them. So if you see a pod of baby alligators, you can pretty be sure that there's at least 1 or 2 moms hanging around. And if you get too close to those, that mom is going to make her presence known. So it's a great, it's really a hoot to see these group of baby gators. They're called a pod. I've seen a couple of those, but please be careful and don't approach them too closely, and certainly don't try to pick them up because you will earn the mother's wrath. Alligators, they're reptiles, so they tend not to be real fast, but they can move very quickly over short distances, and they will frequently lunge out of that water using that very powerful tail to get a good speed coming out of the water to grab their prey. They are ambush hunters generally, and will wait at the edge of the water with just their snout and their eyes appear above the water, wait for something to come down to it, and then launch that ambush. They do not get up on the ground on the bank and run their prey down. That's just more work than they can do. They can be very fast for a few steps, but like most cold-blooded critters, they can't keep it up, and you can outrun an alligator. There's a lot of myths out there about alligators running at 30 miles an hour. That just doesn't happen. They've got no interest in chasing you on land. You're not part of their normal diet. And that this is talk about running in straight lines. Don't do that. Basically just you'll run in a straight line away from the gator. And if you can get 30 or 40 feet in front of the gator, that's the gator's not going to chase any further than that. You're going to be fine. So again, the best way is not to put yourself in that position. And that means if you're approaching the water, take a look out. I mean, it is hard to see a gator in the water by the bank, but if you see one nearby, don't go down by the water. Don't let your kids or your dogs go down by the water. So do not approach a gator either on the water or on land. It may be nice to get up and get that real close picture, but I would not recommend it. The gator is probably going to spook and hopefully run in the other direction. I've had this happen a number of times walking on the dikes at Savannah National Wildlife Refuge. We'll see a 6 or 7 foot gator laying across the dike, catching some sun. They can feel your vibrations. They've got their whole body against the ground. And when you're walking, they can feel that. And almost always they will scoot into the water. Sometimes they'll scare you because they can move very quickly and go crashing through the reeds and all to get in the water. But they will almost always, if they see you or know you're coming, they're going to get out of your way. And we hope you don't approach a gator that's asleep and maybe not paying attention. If you get close and it doesn't scoot, then you back off and find another way around. Remember, dogs are not allowed in the refuges. One of the reasons is that dogs are just about the right size for their natural prey for an alligator. The gator human interactions that have resulted in the death of the humans in Georgia and South Carolina recently, and there's not very many of them. There's only been 4 in the last 25 years, I think. At least 2 of them for sure involved dogs that were by the water. The dog was attacked. The owner tried to save the dog, and the owner got pulled in and killed. So remember, if you're going to take a dog on the refuge, keep it in the vehicle. You can walk them around the visitor center, but don't take them down by the water. Don't take them out on the refuge itself. It's for your safety as well. And it's also for the gator's safety. If a gator attacks a dog or attacks you, it's going to get taken out. So please, follow that regulation. You will be cited if one of the security folks sees you with the dog out of the vehicle. Never feed an alligator. I can't emphasize that enough. It's a violation of state and federal regulations. It's dangerous to you and to the gator. And remember, don't approach or attempt to handle any baby alligators. You can, if you do suddenly encounter a gator, make a noise, wave your arms, make sure it knows that you're there, and they will usually retreat. And then if it doesn't, or if it moves toward you, then you can back up a couple steps. If it keeps coming, turn around and run, because you can outrun the alligator. Now, what do you do from alligator safety? If an alligator grabs your dog, yell, make noise, throw something at it, but I would definitely advise you not to attempt to make a rescue. That you may save the dog, you may give up your life in the attempt. So as much as you love your pooch, I think you really try to do something to rescue the dog or scare the gator away that doesn't involve you getting pulled into the water with them. And that's especially true if you have a leash wrapped around your wrist. You can try to pull the dog back, but if the gator is bigger and pulling the dog in the water, you better let go of that leash. And if a gator grabs you, though, you've got to fight. If you don't, you can't play dead like they say with grizzly bears, because if a gator does grab you and you play dead, then you probably will be. So you want to make sure that you yell, you poke the gator's eyes or snout, try to convince it that that you as a meal are just not worth the fight, and that most of the time it's going to let you go. And you may be a little bit worse for the wear, but you're going to be a lot better off than if it pulls you into the water. What gators like to do is to grab and pull their prey into the water and drown it, and then they can come back and eat it and dismember it at their convenience. And if you can, I know it's hard if this were to happen, whether you can keep your wits about you, basically, but if you can wrap yourself around that gator, hold on to it to try to keep it from doing the death roll. And the death roll, I've got a video here, and I want to see how well that's going to work. Let me give me a second and see if I can share this very quick video with you. Yeah, let's see what happened to it here. Oh, here we go. You get it back to the. This is unusual that you see this. It just happened to be caught with a gator in captivity. Oh, let me get back. Let's go back a little bit here. When he suddenly clamped down on her wrist. At the time, everyone assumed Lindsay was dragged into the tank. She now revealed she jumped in on purpose, thinking it was the best way
trying to fight against the dreaded death roll?
My main objective at that point was to get into the enclosure within so that I could freely roll.
I see.
At the
So
same
you made the conscious decision, I gotta get in so it doesn't fall over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so my hand was in his mouth and I was holding onto his face with my other hand.
So I think you get the idea there. That's pretty scary. I mean, she obviously had quite a the presence of mind, to keep herself from getting her arm torn off like that. But that's typically how alligators and crocodiles will dismember their prey. Is they will pull it in the water and then they will attempt to do that death roll, which tears it apart in little pieces. They've got to swallow whole. They don't chew it, so they've got to get their prey into smaller pieces. All right, just to talk about some large mammals. Here we go. And some of the large mammals you're going to see on the website could include bobcats. And if you get a chance to see one, if you get a chance to see one, it's quite a treat. They're beautiful animals. They're medium-sized cats. They are predators. They will not bother you unless there happen to be rabid. And there have been a number of cases. You may have seen a video from somebody's door cam in North Carolina last year where a rabid bobcat jumped on this woman in her driveway. So like a lot of other animals, they are going to stay away from you. They're mostly going to be active during the early morning and dusk hours. So if you get a chance to see one on the refuge, count yourself lucky. If one approaches you or seems to be acting ill, then back away and get away from it because they are predators. They are prone to pick up rabies. So be sure to be careful with that. But in terms of any actual threat to people, that they're very minimal unless they are ill in some way. Coyotes are becoming more of an issue on the refuges. The coyotes were driven nearly to extinction on the East Coast, but are coming back in big numbers in big ways now. You sometimes hear them, I know, in Pinckney, but again, they tend to be, they go after small mammals and they're scavengers, and they're not a problem unless people start feeding them. And that means if people are putting pet food out, just like they attract raccoons, sometimes putting food out can attract coyotes as well. So you want to be careful and not try to avoid doing that. Also, even in Ohio, where I grew up, there was never any coyotes there. But now my mom has to be careful with her cats. She can't leave them out at night because in the woodlot behind the house, she can hear the coyotes at night. And people have come up with their dogs and cats missing from that. So they will go after pets. Again, unless they are ill or injured in somewhere where they can't hunt, otherwise they're not going to come after you. But you may see them and you may hear them on the refuge. Now, American black bear, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, have not been spotted. We're not in their normal range, although they do range in the middle of Georgia and further down in the Okefenokee, and then further up along the upper South Carolina coast in the Myrtle Beach area. But as far as we know, there hasn't been any reliable spottings of black bears in the area. Black bears can be dangerous. They can get up to a big male can be 200-300 pounds, and they tend to be not aggressive toward people unless they start identifying people with food, which is the big problem they had out in the national parks out west, where bears started breaking into people's tents and cars looking for food because they had to come to associate the people with food. The general rule with bears, if a grizzly bear comes after you, they're after your food or after your lunch. If a black bear attacks you, you are lunch, basically. So that's one of the differences. If you get attacked by a black bear, you're supposed to fight back in every way you can, because otherwise you're gonna be their meal. Whereas typically, if you surprise a grizzly bear, which again we don't have any here, if you startle them or startle a mom with cubs, you want to play dead. They say. I'm not sure how easy that is when the bear is mauling you, but to play dead until they don't think you're a threat, and then they might leave you alone. But you don't do that with black bears. But fortunately, we don't have to deal with black bears now. One thing we do have to deal with, unfortunately, are feral pigs. And the designation feral means these were animals that were once domesticated but have escaped and into the wild and are living on their own in the wild. They do tend to revert from that nice hairless pink pig that you see in the barnyard to one that looks more like this. although there is a fair bit of inbreeding with some of the European wild boars that were brought over to the US for hunting. And there is some interbreeding. So they start, the longer they're living out there, the more they start looking like this, like the, with the big tusks coming up and with the really coarse fur on there. And feral pigs have become a real problem. They are a problem on our barrier islands where they destroy turtle nests and other nesting sites. They also tend to do a lot of damage on the dike system where they do a lot of digging. And they do a lot of crop damage. Texas and Mississippi and Louisiana have had some real serious problems with them. And actually, the Fish and Wildlife Service has just contracted with some hunters to do some feral pig control out on the barrier islands. Unfortunately, they are pretty good swimmers, so they can inhabit the barrier islands and become a bigger issue I think, on Sapelo and on Blackbeard, not so much on Wausau as of yet anyway. But these are potentially dangerous. These pigs have killed people. You can see the big tusk there. Some of the big males, especially the ones that have a fair bit of wild boar genes in them, can be up to 400 or 500 pounds, and they can really do some harm. So in general, again, we've never had an attack that's been reported, at least on our refuges. If you come across a group of feral pigs, you want to back away, stay away from them. They can't climb, so if they do get chased, and we've had some reports of hunters who were treed by pigs, is to get up in a tree until they lose interest and move away. Try not to fall on the ground, because once they're down, they can really do a lot of damage with their tusks. And that's usually how they end up, killing people that way. So be very careful if you see them out there. You probably aren't not going to see them. They tend to be mostly nocturnal, and they kind of lay up during the day, especially when it's hot. Now, we could have talked about panthers here, but mountain lion, but there have been no reliable reports of any mountain lions on any of our refuges. They do exist down in Florida, further down, where they're called the Florida panther. There have been a couple of non-verified reports at Harris Neck, but no actual verified reports of either tracks, spoor, or photographs of mountain lions on the refuges. Any questions? Oh, let's see, I got a couple in the chat here. Any questions? The question, I do not have the audio on here in terms of the growl. I would try to mimic it, but I would not do a very good job. If you search for that online, I'm sure you'll be able to find that, but it's a very impressive because they vibrate their whole body, and you can actually see the water bubble dancing on their backs when they do it. And the sound is very low register, and it carries for a long distance. So, but it'd be worthwhile. I don't have a link to it right here, but I'm sure you can find it. And then feral pigs, again, I'm sure you've already heard about Hogzilla, which is supposedly 600 pounds. It was killed in Alabama. I think the Discovery Channel did a very interesting documentary called Pig Wars or Hog Wars. I'm not sure which one it was, but it had a lot of footage about some of these giant pigs that were killed. Actually, the big one that was called Hogzilla turned out that it had been a domesticated hog that had been fed and got quite big, and then managed to escape. So, but it can be quite big. Now, that's not the average size. The average size is much smaller, but they certainly can get very big. All right, any other questions? Or and we kind of blew through that, but fortunately, these are not critters that are going to give you much trouble. It may scare you when you see them out there, but fortunately, we have not had a lot of issues with them. All right, moving on. Insects, insect stings are obviously very common. We've all been stung, and they're very unlikely to cause any significant harm unless you are allergic to the stings. And there are some people, unfortunately, who are quite allergic to the Hymenoptera stings. That includes the bees, the wasps, and the ants. Also, the main problem with overall with insect stings is the disease transmission. Lyme disease and other diseases from ticks, West Nile virus, and other yellow fever, dengue fever, malaria, which fortunately we don't used to be prevalent in this area, but we don't have anymore. And those kill millions of people every year. And the other problem is if you have a large number of stings, even though each sting is a small amount of venom, you can get sometimes, especially with what's called the Africanized bees, or people call killer bees. They tend to be very aggressive, and you don't get stung once or twice. If you disturb a hive there, you may get stung 200 or 300 times. And there have been a number of fatalities from Africanized bees. if you do have, again, the best defense for the Africanized bees is to turn and run. They won't chase you very far, but you can get a whole lot of stings in a very short period of time, and you can have problems even if you're not allergic, just from the toxicity of the stings themselves. So the treatment, obviously, you want to try to avoid that. Don't go poking these, oh, geez, that wasp nest, whenever there's any wasp in there kind of thing. Don't go stomping on fire ant nests or packs. There are a lot of those ant hills out there of fire, and almost all of them are going to be fire ants. So you want to try to avoid that if you can. And that's, again, part of that situational avoidance. Watch where you're stepping. You can put a cold pack on that, a topical steroid cream, for example. If you do get itchy, you can put either a topical or oral antihistamine. But if you're known to be allergic, you definitely have to carry and use either the EpiPen, which is this automated epinephrine injector, or one of the generic injectors that are coming out now. The problem with the EpiPens is that they're expensive. You know, it's about $120 now, even in the generic version for a 2-pack. Now, they say you should take one with you and keep one in your car. They are single use. They're a self-injector, but they're very easy to use, and you need to practice with that so you know how to use it before you are called to have to use it. And if you have anybody that's with you, a family member that's allergic and carries an EpiPen or generic, make sure you know how to use it as well, because sometimes when the people are having the reaction, they are not thinking straight, and they may not be able to use it right. And I've seen a couple mothers who turned it around the other way and hit the inject and drove the needle through their own thumbnail because they had the wrong end in their hand. So on their thumb on the trigger. So you need to know how to use it before you need it. And if somebody else is with you, you need to know it, how to use it as well. But remember, those are first aid only. If you have a significant reaction, use the EpiPen. That buys you some time, because the epinephrine doesn't last very long, but it buys you time to get help. The other downside for these is they have a relatively short shelf life, and they have to be replaced on schedule, which means you may be throwing away a lot of these $120 2-packs of EpiPen. If you have an EpiPen and it's past its expiration date, though, and that's all you have, use it. It's not like the epinephrine turns to plutonium after that 6-month shelf life. There have been cases reported where people elected not to use their EpiPen because it was had expired and ended up with very serious reaction. A couple of cases where kids died at school because the school nurse took their EpiPen and saw it was expired and didn't use it. So even if it's expired, go ahead and use it. It may not be fully potent, but it's going to be better than nothing, and it's not going to hurt you. And if you're real handy, there's about 3 doses in each one of those EpiPens, and you can take it apart and utilize some more of the epinephrine, but you need to know how to do that ahead of time, because it's got a very powerful spring in there, and it can kind of blow up in your face if you're not careful. But that's an absolute must for anybody with a severe allergy, anybody with an insect sting allergy. If you're going out on the refuge or any place where you're going to be away from immediate help, you really need to make sure you keep that EpiPen with you, or one of its generics. All right, spiders. Now, spiders are members of the Arthropoda phylum, just like insects are, but they're in the class Arachnida. So they are not insects, which are in the insect class. There are 3 species of spiders in this area that are of some concern. And I think you've probably heard about all 3 of those, or at least 2 of those. One is the southern black widow. This is sort of the classic toxic spider or venomous spider that we see around here. Just an aside, there's a difference between being poisonous and venomous. Venomous is an animal that has a venom that has to be injected into your body. Poisonous is a toxin that you ingest by mouth or on your skin. May seem to be nitpicky, but there is a definite difference between venom and toxins and poisons. So what we'll be talking about here now are all toxins, basically, or venoms rather, sorry. But females are the biters. They tend to be the bigger. They can get up to about a ½ inch across. They have, as you can see, I think there's a very characteristic red hourglass on the underside. Now, you won't see that if you're looking at them from the top down, but this is on the underside, and you can see that on their underside if they get turned over. They do like to hide in in dark and protected places. I found a black widow and a nest in my propane grill that had been sitting out and not used for quite a while. Lifted up the lid and was surprised to see about 100 little tiny baby black widow spiders running around in there. So that's one of the places you want to be careful about. They tend, especially when they're laying eggs, they want to put that in a protected place. But very easy to identify with that red triangle, that red hourglass rather. Now, the symptoms of a black widow, they have a very potent neurotoxin. Now, fortunately, they don't inject very much at one time. It's called alpha-lactotoxin. It is a neurotoxin. And at the site, you'll get the immediate sting and burning, but those could be trivial. You may not notice much of that. It may not seem much more than like an insect sting of a mosquito bite, for example. But within a couple of hours, you can sometimes develop muscle cramps and rigidity in the abdominal and chest muscles. This can be severe enough that people have been mistaken to have an acute abdomen, and people have had their appendix taken out as a result of this, thinking that spasm and rigidity in their abdomen was peritonitis from a ruptured appendix. And this can last for a long time. This can be fairly debilitating. Now, fortunately, uncommon, but if you do get a good dose of this and for whatever reason you are specifically sensitive to it, these symptoms can last for a long time. Now, you can also get milder symptoms, dizziness, rash, itching, that sort of thing. And because of the neurotoxicity, you can get some anxiety, some sweating, tearing, increased salivation, some tremors. Very unusual. There had been remotely some deaths attributed to this, but now that we understand more about the care of it, it's very rare to die from a black widow bite. You may feel pretty miserable. You may feel like you want to die at some point, but death is very rare. Basic treatment is a first aid for anything. Put a cold pack on the area, secure or photograph the spider for later ID if possible, unless you're absolutely certain that it's a black widow, but certainly don't risk getting stung or bitten again. And then seek medical attention if you're sure that that was a black widow. Even if you don't have a whole lot of symptoms at once, we know that some of these more severe symptoms can take several hours to kick in. There are antivenoms available. There are other medications available, muscle relaxants. Treatment with calcium compounds can seem to be able to relax some of the spasm. And there is an antivenom not readily available, but it is available for severe cases. But again, it's more for symptomatic relief because, again, the chance of dying from this is pretty slim. Now, there's a brown widow spider as well, which is a tropical spider that was introduced into Florida many years ago and now has worked its way north. And it has very small amounts of venom. It has smaller injectors, so it doesn't really get much into you. It does have a little red hourglass on the underside. I couldn't find a real good picture of that, but it's definitely not that shiny, glossy black like the black widow spider is. And the treatment for this is basically just symptomatic treatment. There hasn't been any really significant envenomations or anybody gotten really sick from this. Now, the other one that everybody's all heard of is the brown recluse. It's a very common biter nationally, but pretty rare locally. Although those of us who've worked in emergency departments, we see lots of people coming in saying they've got spider bites, but I think very few of those turn out to really be spider bites. Someone has asked about a paste of bicarbonate. I think any kind of cooling paste that you can put on there is probably going to work. It's not, I don't know that there's anything specific about, the alkaline pH of bicarbonate, but I think there's all sorts of different treatments that have been proposed, especially for the brown recluse bite, because it works differently than the black widow bites. The brown recluse is identified by this brown violin on its thorax. Again, you got to get pretty close. These spiders are not very big, so you got to get a pretty close look at it to determine it. They like undisturbed, dry, warm areas. That's why sometimes people are bitten in their bedrooms. The spider gets up underneath the covers or in the curtains. You're not going to see these much out in the open. If you're hiking on one of the trails on the refuges, this is not the kind of location where you're going to see a brown recluse. But if you're messing around with a brush pile out there, or if you're in the photo blind out there that's been undisturbed for a while, that might be a place where a brown recluse would want to hang out. We don't have a lot of brown recluses in this area. This is not really part of their endemic range. But they have a cytotoxic and hemolytic venom as opposed to the neurotoxic venom of the black widow. And you get pain and burning at the site, and that may take a while for these toxic chemicals to start breaking down the skin. And you'll sometimes get this bullseye lesion with this whitish area in the middle surrounded by this area of erythema. And it goes on to develop what's called dermatonecrosis or dermonecrosis, which is can look like this. And these things can take a very long time to heal. And all sorts of pastes and other various first aids have been recommended for this. I'm not sure that anyone has a really good one that's been shown to really work. You can also get a systemic reaction with this, which is called systemic loxoscelism from their name. And sometimes you get rash, fever, vomiting. Those are quite rare. And I've been in emergency departments for a long time. I've never made that diagnosis anyway, but the dermatomycosis is pretty typical. You have this necrotic area in the middle. You have this pale area around where the blood vessels are all constricted and there's no blood flow, and then the erythema, the inflammation around that. And that's a very typical bite from a brown recluse spider. These are confused many, many times with cutaneous abscesses, which we've been seeing lots of, caused by the methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, the MRSA. And I don't know how many times have been people come in and say, oh, they had a spider bite, and it really turns out to be a MRSA abscess. So I guess I should have mentioned that I'm an emergency physician, retired now, but worked in the emergency departments for over 30 years. So we saw lots and lots of these, especially in Savannah. All right, the treatment for that, cold compresses are thought maybe to reduce the activity of some of the venom components. You may need actually to get that necrotic area surgically removed, sometimes to the point where you might need a skin graft over that. There's some evidence that hyperbaric oxygen may be of some benefit, although that's debatable. I don't think there's been a lot of good studies on that. But it's a nasty, it can be, it's got a range of toxicity from just a mild irritation to this full-blown systemic syndrome. But fortunately, most of the bites are small and self-limited, although it can take quite a while for that necrotic lesion to heal. All right, this is the thing on the refuge that I worry the most about, frankly, is the fire ants. I don't like fire ants. These, again, are transplanted insects from South America. They are in the same, the Hymenoptera family, the same as bees and wasps. They have mandibles, like what you can see up in here. They don't really bite. They will bite onto you, and then they have a stinger down here, and they will rotate around and will sting multiple times. And sometimes that's why you'll see like a little ring of these pustules that develop. They are painful and they itch, and they take a long time to get better, unfortunately. But there have been a couple cases in Savannah of people who've died from anaphylaxis from this. We took care of a guy when I was at Memorial who went out in his yard and got stung a number of times and treated him. He had mild reaction. He went out home, went out the next day. He decided he was going to get rid of the fire ants, managed to get himself stung multiple times, and now he'd been sensitized, had a severe reaction, and died. So that is a potential if you are allergic. And there is some cross-reactivity with some of the other Hymenopteras as well. So you can still be allergic to this even if you've never been stung by one. So they tend to have big mounds built of sand. You'll see them all along the dikes out there. I know the temptation is to poke them and see them all scurry around, but they will come and scurry up that stick and get a hold of you. I once picked up a big pine cone to show my grandkids, and it had fire ants in it, unbeknownst to me, and I got stung all over my hand, which was not fun. So I don't have any fond memories of these guys, and I'm sure most of you have run into those at some point or another as well. So the treatment from that is, first of all, if you're standing on the nest, get all on the anthill, get away from it, brush any ants off your skin and clothing, cold packs. Some people have said that dilute bleach may reduce the burning and pain. You'd have to put that on right away. You can also use topical steroid cream to help with the itching. But once you get these little bubbles there, those are going to be there for a while. And then other stinging insects, again, are going to be mostly from the order Hymenoptera. That's the wasps, the bees, and the hornets. And again, when you think about it, there are more deaths in the U.S. every year because of stinging insects than there are from sharks and snakes combined. And most of those occur within 30 minutes. So these are people who are pretty highly allergic, had a sting or multiple stings, and got severe allergic reaction before they could get some help. And 200 honeybee stings, that may sound like a lot, but if you're looking at the Africanized honeybees, sometimes there have been reports of 300, 400, 500 stings because they are very aggressive and they swarm when they feel that their hive is threatened. And again, you've all had this immediate pain, stinging, burning at the site. Some people are much more sensitive than others to this, and even with a mosquito bite, we'll get a significant swelling there. Some people, if you get enough toxin in your system, enough venom, you can get nausea and vomiting with that. But the signs of a generalized reaction include hives, wheezing, shortness of breath. Any respiratory symptoms are an acute emergency and require immediate medical treatment, hopefully to begin with an epinephrine injector if you have one. But the quicker you develop a reaction to the sting, and the more likely it is to be severe. And if you start out with any kind of shortness of breath, wheezing, change in your voice, those are all very serious symptoms which could result in a very quick airway compromise and death. So those are the kind of things you really have to be careful and watch out for. That's why it's so important to have the epinephrine injector with you if you're known to be allergic. And then if you do see a visible stinger in the wound, you want to try to get that out carefully. Remember, honeybees, when they sting, the sting and the stinging sac remains in the wound and pulls away, and the bee dies. If you see it, you can sometimes see them actually pulsating as they're injecting the venom. So you want to try to get that stinger out of there. Don't grab it and squeeze the sac, because then you squeeze all the venom into it. But you want to pick it up with a pair of tweezers or with a kind of credit card or something narrow like that, flick it off to get it out of your skin. And then the antihistamines, and again, severe symptoms are a true medical emergency, and you need to get help as quickly as possible with that. Now, ticks are arachnids and are ectoparasites of mammals and birds, and there are tons of different kinds of ticks out there, and many of these ticks can carry human diseases. I'm sure everybody thinks about Lyme disease right offhand, but Rocky Mountain spotted fever, ehrlichiosis, tularemia, babesiosis, southern tick-associated rash illness, that's the newer one. And there's also a very unusual one called tick paralysis. And this is not an infection process. This is actually a generalized paralysis that can lead to death from a toxin that's released by the tick. The tick has to be in continuous attachment to you. So this most often occurs if a tick is in the hair or in a place where you can't see it. And the treatment for this is remove the tick, and almost within a very short period of time, the symptoms all resolve. It's a very short-acting toxin, but that's the one difference. All the rest of these are infectious agents that are carried by the saliva of the tick. This is an actual toxin that is released into the bloodstream and causes this generalized paralysis. This chart, I'm sure, is not going to be too easy to read, but the diseases we are concerned about most is Lyme, which did not used to be a problem here. It's maybe getting to be a little bit more of an issue now. And this is carried by the deer tick, and the treatment for that is an antibiotic. The ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, again, pretty unusual in this area. The interesting about Rocky Mountain spotted fever is you can have this with somewhere away from the Rocky Mountains. You don't have to have a rash, and you don't have to have a fever. So you could have Rocky Mountain spotted fever in Georgia with no rash and no fever, and having never been to the Rocky Mountains. But it's not real common, but it does occur. Unfortunately, it's again pretty easily treated with antibiotics. Tularemia is a disease that's more associated with rabbits, and people getting it from cleaning rabbits and getting infected that way. But again, fortunately, all of these treatments are treatable with relatively straightforward, antibiotic courses. There are chronic illnesses. There's a chronic Lyme disease that can occur with chronic infection if it's not diagnosed and treated quickly enough. And there's quite a debate that goes on about chronic Lyme disease. Does it exist? How many people who claim to have Lyme disease, chronic Lyme, really have it? So there's a whole big debate about that, which I am going to stay away from at this point. So any of you who have chronic Lyme disease out there, please excuse me. I'm not going to get into that. All right, someone asked about the technique for that, and finally, that's the next slide. So tick bite prevention, that's the best treatment, is to not get bitten. Ticks have to attach and hang on to you, and it's thought that they have to hang on for at least 24 hours before they are capable of transmitting the Lyme disease bacteria. So if you can find a tick and get rid of it in short order, then you are going to prevent pretty much getting any of these kind of conditions. You want to use a proven insect repellent as well. These are like the DEET, which is 15 to 30% DEET. There's a lot of debate about DEET. The FDA says it's safe to use, not to use it in kids less than 2 months old. It can cause problems to expensive equipment like cameras and binoculars. So you want to be careful with that, because it is a hydrocarbon basically, and it can cause some problems. It ate up some leather that I had on a camera harness that I had one time. So you do have to be careful with it. If you don't want to use DEET, just as effective and less potentially of a problem is 30% oil of lemon eucalyptus or 20% of picaridin, which is a plant product. And these work almost as well as the DEET, with much less of the concern about that potential, at least for some toxicity from the DEET. The DEET you can get from 5% to 100%. The only difference that makes is the higher the percentage, the longer the effect lasts. It's no more effective. 100% DEET is no more effective against insects than 30% is, but it will last quite a bit longer. You don't have to reapply it as often. So 15 to 30% in that range is fine. You want to use a lower dose to help cut back on any potential problems you might have with it. Although, again, I think the latest study showed that there really seems that the initial concern about DEET was kind of overblown. Another good way to do is to pre-treat your footwear and clothing with 0.5% of permethrin. This is also a plant product. It comes in a spray bottle, and they recommend that whatever clothes you're going to wear, if you're going out into the field, that you a day or two ahead of time, that you pre-treat them. You really give them a good soaking with this. Let them dry. You do not apply it directly to your skin. And you apply that to the clothing and to your shoes. And that will keep the ticks. If they land on your clothing, they will leave. They just don't like the permethrin, as opposed to the DEET and the eucalyptus can actually kill some of the ticks. And then when you're done for the day, when you come back, and this can be, you can make this fun if you like, but do a complete tick check on yourself and your partner, whoever else was out in the woods with you. And particularly look in those areas that are not obvious, like in the skin folds, in the scalp, and especially if you have long hair. This is where ticks like to hang out. It's protected, and you sometimes make it much harder to see. And if you do find a tick, the important part is not to grab the body. Don't grab down here and then pull, because what happens then is, first of all, whatever blood is in here and whatever bacteria is in the body, you tend to squeeze back in to the bloodstream. So you want to reach with a pair of tweezers, and you probably, if you have a first aid kit or you're going out hiking, ought to have a pair of fine tip tweezers. Try to pull the skin aside so you can reach up underneath to get the mouth parts, and can grab a hold and gently pull up. Don't jerk it up. You don't want to pull the body away and leave the mouth parts. You want to gently pull it up, and then pull it up that way. And then when you're done, take a look at it and examine it and see, make sure you've got the mouth parts in there. And there are plenty of pictures of ticks on the internet. You can take a look at and try to identify the tick. If it was one that you just found that day and you're sure it had only been on there for a short period of time, you generally don't need to worry about identifying it or trying to send it somewhere. If you find a tick that may have been there for a while, especially if it's got a fair bit of like redness and inflammation around it, which would indicate it might have been there for more than 24 hours, then it's probably a good idea to try to identify the tick using these identification guides that are posted all over. You can find, every public health department has one. There are also places where you can send a tick. So if you pull one off and you're feeling okay, you've got no symptoms, you might want to hang on to that. And if you do start feeling symptoms, then you can take it somewhere or send it somewhere to try to identify it. And sometimes they can even tell you whether it was infected with one of these organisms. If you see a tick that has there's a typical bullseye lesion where it looks like a target, where right where the tick is, it's pale, and then it has a reddened area around it. And especially if that rash moves around, which is called erythema migrans, that is a classic finding for Lyme disease, and that definitely needs to be treated. Whether you've seen the tick there or not, you definitely need to get treated with that. So you can call your primary health doc or your local public health department to get treated for that, because early treatment seems to be for almost everybody to completely avoid the problem of chronic Lyme disease, although there's some debate about that. But again, fine tooth, reach down there and grab a hold of the part of the right below the mouth parts and try to gently pull it up, and then examine it afterwards to make sure you've got the mouth parts in it. But don't grab the body and squeeze, because then you're going to squeeze whatever content is in there. And you'll be surprised. These ticks can be very small, but when they have a good blood meal, you can see a great, I mean, this body can get very engorged with blood and get you kind of dark red in there. And that's another indication, if you find one that's very large, very much engorged, that it was probably been in there for a while. All right, we're going to finish up with one of my favorites. I'm a herp guy myself, is venomous snakes. Again, venomous, not poisonous. There are in the US 7,000 to 8,000 bites reported per year, but many go unreported. And there's only around 5 or so deaths per year. Pretty much unheard of for somebody now to get with a venomous snake bite who arrives at a medical care facility alive, almost unheard for them to die. Now, they can end up with some long-term sequelae. They may lose some tissue or may lose a finger or two, but it's very unlikely that they're going to die. And over a 20-year review that was recently done, there were about 101 fatal snake bites in the U.S. There are 25 fatal ones that were reported in the from the 20 teens to currently. 3 of those were in Georgia. 1 was in South Carolina. 7 of those deaths of those 25 were people that were handling snakes, either in religious ceremonies or handling their pet snakes. The rest of those all occurred down in Florida, or mostly in Florida and in Texas. But again, we've only had 3 in Georgia. I've had the misfortune to see 1 of those when I was practicing at Memorial. It was a 5-year-old who died. But they, again, are pretty unusual for that to happen. Most of these are in young white males, although we see more of those too when you get into religious ceremonies and that some older folks. 95% are on the extremities, which means somebody either stepped on the snake or they tried to pick it up. And that's the typical story. And I know there was one somebody in Texas who specialized in snake bites who said he got a call about a snake bite, and a young man, he said, look, did he smell like alcohol? Yes. Did he have any tattoos? Yes. Was it on his hand? Yes. He said, okay, that's typical. Now, unfortunately, venomous snake bites are a much bigger health concern worldwide, one that's been, I think the World Health Organization has identified as one that needs to be further evaluated, is that there's many as 100,000 deaths per year and 400,000 debilitating sequelae, and many of those deaths are unreported. If you're working on a tea plantation out in the boonies in Indonesia somewhere, that death may not get reported. Most of these deaths occur in sub-Saharan Africa and in South and Southeast Asia. So. Now, how do you avoid it? That's the best thing to do, obviously, is to watch where you step or place your hands. Don't reach around. Don't step right over a log. Maybe stand on it, step away from it, but don't put your ankle right down on the other side of the log where you can't see where you're putting your leg. Don't reach into dark places where you can't see what's going on in there. And I would strongly consider, if you're out doing anything in the field, especially if you're not staying on the well-marked paths or dikes, is to wear a snake bite resistant boots or chaps. Those are readily available. They're a little heavy and uncomfortable, but they are, they say they're guaranteed that if the snake bites through the boot and you die, they'll replace the boot. So that's pretty confident there. And just real quick, this is the typical thing, venomous snakes in our area, 5 out of the 6 species are the pit vipers. They have an elliptical pupil, a cat's eye pupil. They have the nostril here and then a pit. This is their forward-looking infrared, their FLIR pit. And that's why they're called pit vipers. And they tend to have this triangular head, and the scales up in here are rounded and then flat here. And this is on a non-venomous snake, they tend to have the round eye. They don't have the fangs there, and their heads tend to blend in more right with their body. They don't have an obvious neck like the venomous snakes or the pit vipers do. Now, there is an exception, which we'll talk about in a minute here, but there are 6 venomous snakes in our area. 3 of those are rattlesnakes, the eastern diamondback, the canebrake, or also called the timber, and the Carolina or the dusky pygmy, and there are actually 2 subspecies of that. And then the eastern cottonmouth and the southern copperhead, which are both in the same genus. And then an entirely different type of snake, the eastern coral snake, which is an elapid snake, which is more in the, not in the viper family like all of these are, but it's more in the elapid family, which is the family that includes cobras. All right, so again, this is one of those shots. This is the eastern diamondback. It's To quote the Peterson Field Guide, quote, "an ominously impressive snake to meet in the field," close quote. And I can imagine it would be. The record for the U.S. is right around 8 feet long and 34 pounds. Now, 34 pounds, that is a heavy snake. Now, that's not the typical one. The average is 3 to 6 feet and 5 to 6 pounds. But when they get fully grown, they, rabbits are one of their main food sources. So they can get quite big. They are quite bulky too, as you can see. We don't see a lot of the big ones anymore because they've been mostly killed off. And there's some concern actually about putting eastern diamondbacks on the endangered species list because their numbers have dropped so dramatically because of habitat loss and the indiscriminate killing of them. One way to quickly identify, again, it's hard. You can see this has a cat's eye pupil, but it's hard to see. But obviously the rattle, which you can't see on here, the rattle is the giveaway. And if you hear a rattle, stop, try to figure out where it's coming from and back up. But the eastern diamondbacks also have these two parallel light streaks in their scales on their face. And that's the only rattlesnake, only snake around here that has that. So shouldn't really mistake that for anything. But that's, again, that's not as common as it used to be, but it certainly is. They're good swimmers. They're out on the barrier islands, and they're sometimes seen swimming in fresh and in salt water. A more common venomous snake for us here is the what's called the canebrake rattlesnake. It's our version of the timber rattlesnake. Again, has this diamond shape, or lance shaped head, the vertical pupil here. It's got the rattle, which again, you can't really see very well here. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. See, so this is a pretty good size snake. Each time the snake sheds its skin, it has adds an additional rattle. And I was taking a class trip out for preschoolers out on Savannah National Wildlife Refuge once and saw a canebrake laying alongside the road that had 15 rattles, 15 buttons on the rattle. So that was a snake that had been doing well for itself. But the typical finding for this is this longitudinal brown streak on the top. All timber rattlesnakes have that. That's a dead giveaway. If you see a rattlesnake that looks like that, that has that brown streak on it, that's a canebrake. And then this one you probably never see. I've never seen one. This is the dusky pygmy rattlesnake. They say its rattle sounds like a bee buzzing because it's so small. It's quite small and very secretive. And again, the diamond-shaped head you can see here, rattle. This one's a relatively young one. You can't tell how old a snake is by the number of rattles because sometimes they break off, and snakes may shed more than once a year. So they may add more than one button per year. But the fewer the rattles, especially if it's a smaller snake, you can probably guess it's a younger one. Now, this is one that is very common in this area. This is one that there has been some reported snake bites in Savannah National Wildlife Refuge from this one. This is the eastern cottonmouth, or what's called as a water moccasin. This can be a tough snake to identify sometimes because the colored patterns are very varied. They can be from almost completely black to a dark green to having patterns like this or having a mixed pattern. Once they open their mouth, there's no mistaking. They have this very white mucous membrane lining their mouth, and that's where the term comes from, the cottonmouth. And they will sometimes lay there in a coil and just open their mouth like that and look up at you, and that's their threat position. And when you see that, that's a good time to get out of the way. People worry about these things dropping out of trees into boats. These snakes are not really good tree climbers, and sometimes water snakes will do that. And a lot of water snakes get killed because they are mistaken for cottonmouths. I don't think there's only been in the records I could find only one reported death from a cottonmouth bite, and that was from an 80-year-old man who did not seek medical attention right away. So, these are they have a bad reputation as being very bad-tempered, but that's probably not really correct. Most of the time, when you get close to a cottonmouth, you don't even know it. They are prefer to hide and lay back and let you walk by and not even let you know that they're there. The most common biter in this area is the eastern copperhead, a beautiful snake. Unfortunately, it's been the death of many corn snakes because people sometimes confuse them. This one doesn't have a rattle. It does have the triangular head. Very clearly, you can see the cat eye pupil here. And these are ambush predators. They'll lay in the leaf litter. You can see how easily this would blend into the leaf litter and wait for something to come by. And sometimes they'll lay in one spot for many, many hours waiting for it. When they're little, the end of their tail is green. And they will sometimes lay in the leaf litter, lift their tail up and wiggle that around as if it were a little insect, and hope that some mouse or some other smaller critter will come up to investigate it. But these are beautiful snake. If you get a chance to see one out in the wild, not very aggressive, but again, they are the most common biters, because I think people tend to, they try to pick them up. They don't think they're as big an issue as a rattlesnake. And then the last one is the eastern coral snake. And I'm sure you've all heard the old expression, red on yellow, kill a fellow, red on black, friend of Jack, or venom lack. Eastern coral snakes have a very colorful body. They are very secretive. They're tough to find. You'll be lucky if you ever see one out in the wild. But they have this black, yellow, and red pattern where the black and the red are interrupted by this yellow band. So the red and yellow kill a fellow. These are the venomous ones. They also have a black nose and a black face up here. They don't have the triangular head. They have round pupils because they're not vipers. And they tend to be smaller than your average rattlesnake, and very thin bodied, as you can see. They're not bulky like the rattlesnakes are. They can be confused though for the scarlet king snake rather. Again, red, black, and yellow, but here the yellow bands separate the black. So this is red on black, venom lack. So this is the scarlet king snake, and its face is red, not black. So that's one way you can tell the difference between them. All right, we're running a little long here. I'm sorry, a little bit more talkative. Let's go on to snake bite. First aid. First thing, don't panic. Death or significant disability is rare, especially if you get some medical attention. Half or so of all venomous snake bites are dry. That means there's no venom injected. That's a warning defensive bite. They're not trying to bite you to inject their venom to start decomposing you so they can eat you. They're just trying to tell you to get away. They can't, that's the only way they have. They can't yell at you. They can't push you away with their hands. The only way they can try to deter you is to bite by biting. And symptomatic treatment and specific antivenoms are available, readily available, and they are quite effective. You try to describe or identify the snake, or capture or photograph it if feasible, but don't risk being bitten again. If it's a rattlesnake, the antivenom for rattlesnakes, copperheads, and moccasins is all the same, so it doesn't matter which one. The only difference would be if it were a coral snake, and those are very different bites. Coral snake bites tend to they don't strike quickly and inject and pull back like the pit vipers do. They tend to grab a hold and hang on, and they got to kind of chew on you to work that neurotoxin in. So these are usually only happen if you're trying to handle the snake. And the most common place for a bite is that web space between the thumb and the first finger, because people are reaching for them and they latch onto that loose skin and they hold on and they kind of chew it to get the venom in. But the treatment for the pit vipers is the same. So it's not necessary to know. If you know it was a rattlesnake or you think it was a copperhead, that's close enough. If you can get a picture of it, that's fine as well. But first aid, you'll get away from the snake, obviously. Relax, take a deep breath, reassess what's going on. Take off any constricting items. If it's on the hand, take off watches, rings, bracelets, anything that might restrict the flow, because we know it's going to swell. Keep the body part below or at the level of the heart. Don't lift it up real high. Don't lift it up real low. And then get some emergency medical help as soon as you can. There are certain no's to go with it. First aid don'ts. No ice. Ice tends to constrict the blood vessels there. You're already having trouble with circulation in that area. It's never been shown to do any good, and actually has been shown to do more harm frequently. No tourniquet. I saw a gentleman one time who came in, had an eastern king snake bite on his thumb, a non-venomous snake, but he had a rubber band wrapped so tight around his thumb that his thumb was purple and cold, and I thought he was going to lose his thumb just from the tourniquet. The other thing about the tourniquet is if you put a tourniquet on and restrict blood flow out of the limb, then all of the venom will be concentrated at the site or or at least nearby, and you're much more likely to get some serious local effect. And if you don't have the tourniquet, it will distribute to the rest of your body, but it's diluted then. And also, if you're getting medical attention, we can neutralize that with the antivenom. Don't use electric shock. There was for a while it was going on. You use a car battery and shock somebody, and that would be a way to avoid it, to treat it, and that's just not a clue at all. Another question about cottonmouths. I don't think that really happens. I've had people swear to me that the cottonmouths dropped out of the trees. These tend to be big, heavy bodied snakes. They are swimmers. Fish are one of their main foods. So I don't know why they would be in a tree to begin with. And there are lots of water snakes that look like moccasins. So I don't know. People tell me that that's happened. It's hard for me to believe, but I wasn't there, so I'm not going to say. I think it's unlikely, but probably not impossible. And also then I'm getting ahead of myself here. No cut and suck. This used to be, the Boy Scout technique. You'd make an X mark over the bite and try to suck it out. Well, a couple of things about that. Number one, most of the time people aren't trained in how to do this, and they end up making some big cuts. They've cut blood vessels, cut nerves, made it much worse. They've cut they've cut dry bites where there's no venom injected, and you cannot suck anything out of that wound. Even with these kits that come along, I think I would recommend none of these. None of these extractors really work. You don't cut it and suck. You don't put a tourniquet on. You don't shock somebody with a battery. The very best first aid kit is this: your car keys and your phone. And that's obviously that shows this is one of the old slides here with a flip phone. I guess I got to update that with the smartphone instead. All right, to summarize, finally, be aware of your surroundings. Refuges are not theme parks. These are not tame animals. Be careful while you're out there. Be aware of where you're walking. If you're looking through your camera lens or your binoculars, watch your step. If you're allergic, make sure you have an EpiPen and let people who are with you know how to use it. If you have it, wear insect repellent when you're in the field. Remove ticks promptly. Get medical attention at once if bitten by a snake. And if you see a bear, let us know, because we never had one reported on the refuge. We definitely want to know about that. All right. Any questions at all? You can either chime in and unmute yourself and chime in, or if you want to put it in the chat, I can answer them there. Nobody? Okay. Or did I put everybody to sleep with all that? I don't know. All right. Well, if there's no questions, if you do have anything, I put my email address on the chat there. You can send me a question about it. I think that there's plenty of other information. If you want to find out more about ticks and tick-borne illnesses in particular, both Georgia and South Carolina public health departments have information on their websites about ticks and how to remove them and what kind of ticks and what to look for symptomatically. Oh, we got one in the chat here. Oh, Linda says, thank you. And Linda, thank you for joining in and for sharing. All right, now I do have one other question for folks is we do not have a speaker for next month, which would be April the 12th. That would be shortly, a couple of weeks before our annual meeting. And I would be interested, anybody that has a topic that they would like to have us cover in this Tuesday session, please email me or call me or go on the website and put something in the email there, and we'll entertain any notions about it. You can take a look at the ones we've already done. Those will be on the on our website, on the on the YouTube site, and take a look at those. And if that brings up any other ideas that you'd like to have us discuss, just let us know. And I think we'll try to keep this up even once we're open and have more in-person events. We may do some hybrid events where we'll have live interviews or live programs and then stream them as well for people who maybe aren't quite ready to go to a live event for health reasons, or maybe can't make it. They can join in that way. But again, would like to have everybody think about what you can do for the Friends group for this reboot, for this Friends Forward idea. Plan on coming to the April 30th meeting with your ideas. And if you're interested in getting more involved with the Friends, please email me and let me know. We are actively seeking candidates for our board of directors, and we'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in terms of what that would involve. No experience is necessary, just some energy and some time and some ideas and some desire to help us with our mission of protecting and advocating for the wildlife refuges in our area. All right, anybody else? All right, well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month, if not before then. And again, please get a hold of me if you have any questions or you want to help get more involved with the Friends group. All right, thanks again.
Thanks, Rick. That was great.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. Chris, that means a lot.